Okay guys, so to solve a radical inequality, we got to follow these steps. Step 1, set the radicand to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. All right. What is the radicand? It is the value inside the square root. Okay. You have to set the radicand value. So in this case, you would set the x to be greater than or equal to 0. Wait, I'm sorry, that's not even an inequality. We've got to go to the bottom half of this homework. So down here, you would have to set a to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so step 1, set the radicand to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. So let's actually do that. I want to write down step 1 right here. I want to say a has to be greater than or equal to 0. Now, let me explain why this first step exists. We already know that we cannot have a negative number in here. If this were negative, then it messes everything up. You'd end up with an imaginary value. So we need this to be at least 0 or any positive number that's greater than 0. And that's why we say that whatever is inside the square root, which is known as the vocab word radicand, the radicand has to be set greater than or equal to 0. And so step 1, set the radicand greater than or equal to 0 and then solve. Now this is already solved for us. I mean, that's the answer. A is greater than or equal to 0. Now, if we go back to step 2 says solve the entire inequality and get another answer. All right, so let's go back over here. So we already did step 1. Let's do step 2, solve the entire inequality. Like, okay, just solve it the way you normally would. Get rid of that 3 by dividing by 3, dividing by 3. What do we have left? We have the square root of a is greater than or equal to 4. I need to get rid of the square root, so I am going to square both sides. I will end up with a is greater than or equal to 4 times 4 is 16. And here is my other answer that step 2 is talking about. Okay. Step 1, set the radicand value to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. It's already done for us. There's nothing to solve. We already got the answer. A is greater than or equal to 0. And then step 2, solve the whole thing. A is greater than or equal to 16. Now, step 3, let's go back to the notes over here. Step 3 is to place answers on a number line and test or visually see the overlap, okay? So let's go over here. Let's take those two answers that we got from step 1 and step 2, and let's test them on a number line or visually see the overlap. So A is greater than or equal to 0 is right here. So greater than or equal to, that'd be a solid dot. Greater than is to the right. Let's do the other one in blue. This one is at 16. 16 is way over here. Greater than or equal to 16. So solid dot at 16, greater than is also over here. So you could conclude your answer either by understanding the visual representation of the inequalities, because you always want to represent your overlap piece, all right? Or you could simply test values that are on different sides of these two critical points, right? So like if you wanted to, you could test a number that's over here, any number over here, it doesn't matter what it is, like negative 10. Now we already know if we test negative 10 into the original, the square root of negative is imaginary, so I already know it's not going to work. So this is a no. Anything on the left side of 0 does not work. If I test any value in between 0 and 16, let's see if it works. What number would be good to test right here that's between 0 and 16? Anybody? What number would be good to plug in right here that's between 0 and 16? I mean, I could plug in any number I want, but what number would be good? All right, 1 would work perfectly. That's cool. So let's plug in a 1, which is clearly in between the 0 and the 16. When I plug in 1, square root of 1 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 is not greater than or equal to 12. So 1 did not work either. No. And even if I were to plug in like a 4, that's not going to work. A 9, that's not going to work. But we know that 16 and above, it really does work, right? So let's say I plugged in the number 25. Say I plugged in 25. Square root of 25 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15, and 15 is greater than 12. So over here, it's a yes, it does work. So on the notes, on the third step, it says for you to either understand your answer visually or test your points. Right here in yellow, I tested points, right? It did not work over here. It did not work right here. And it did, yes, it worked over here on this side. So I know that my answer is x is greater than or equal to 16. That's my answer. X is greater than or equal to 16. Now, step 3 does say either test your answers or visually conclude where your answers are at. And the answers are the overlap piece. So we know that this inequality a is greater than or equal to 0. It's going this way, and it goes this way forever. Okay? And we know that a is greater than or equal to 16. It's right here, and it goes to the right, and it goes forever. So where's the actual overlap piece? It is from here this way. So you could conclude your answer by seeing where it overlaps. And since the overlap is at 16 and to the right of 16, you would say that your answer is x is greater than or equal to 16. But if you're not more of a visual person and you actually like just plugging and chugging, you want to plug in some numbers, go ahead. You could have plugged in -10 and seen that it didn't work. You could have plugged in any number like 4, see that didn't work. And you could have plugged in any number like 25 and see that it does work. So it's totally up to you guys. Now, the point here is sometimes you're going to get one single inequality answer, but if these areas would have been together, then you'd have to have a compound inequality with 0 right here, a in the middle, 16 on that side with less than symbols between them. So sometimes you'll actually get a compound inequality with the variable in the middle. It all depends on how your answer will be. So when we look at this, it's actually like doing 3 problems. There's 3 parts to it, okay? I don't know, shall we try this one? Let's try it. Step 1, if we look at the steps, says set the radicand to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so step 1, what is the radicand here? Anybody? What's the radicand? What do I need to do for step 1? That's my radicand. What do I do?
You set it equal to greater than or equal to 0.
Thank you very much. Set it greater than or equal to 0. And of course, the reason why we do this is because we need this to be an actual answer, right? You don't want this to end up imaginary, right? You don't want the z plus 5, whatever z is, you don't want it to end up being a negative number. Because if it's negative, the square root of a negative is imaginary, and we don't want that. So that's why we're saying that the z plus 5, it has to be greater than or equal to 0 in order for this to possibly work. So we're going to set it to be greater than or equal to 0. We're going to solve it. Let's solve. Subtract 5, cancels out. We end up with z is greater than or equal to -5. Okay, so this is a possible answer right there. What is step 2? Step 2 reads, solve the entire inequality and get another answer. Okay, so let's go back to the entire inequality, this whole thing, and let's solve it. How do I solve it? Well, you first need to isolate it. And then afterwards, you get rid of the square root, etc., etc. So let's isolate it first. We're going to, let me actually put that way we don't get confused with our work. Let's isolate it first. Subtract 4. I will end up with the square root of z plus 5 is less than or equal to, what is that, 9? All right, so what would the next step be right here if I'm trying to solve this inequality? You square both sides. Yeah, that's right. You square both sides. Thanks for participating, guys. All right, so we're going to square right here and square right there. And we will end up with z plus 5 is less than or equal to 81. We're going to subtract 5. We're going to end up with z being less than or equal to, what is that, 76? Wow. Hope I didn't make a mistake. This looks ugly. So we have that so far. What is step 3? It says place answers on a number line and test or visually see the overlap. Okay, so let me go to a number line over here. I'm going to go to my number line in green. And I'm going to put the -5 over here and the +76 over there. And when we look at this first one, z is greater than or equal to -5, solid dot greater than, and then over here z is less than or equal to 76, solid dot to the left. This is a compound inequality written together. So visually, I already know that my answer will be this: x in the middle, well, technically z in the middle, sorry about that, -5 on this side, 76 on that side, with the less than or equal to symbols. Now, they're not going to always be less than or equal to. Well, this one will always be less than or equal to, because step one says set it to be greater than or equal to. I'm sorry, greater than or equal to, so that will have a solid line underneath whatever portion this answer lands on. But the other one, it might be just a regular less than, it might be just a regular greater than. That just depends on this. Anyway, I already know that this is my answer. So visually, I know that the overlap is between those two values. The overlap is right here. So my answer is all the z values that are between -5 and 76, including both the -5 and the 76. Let's do it numerically, in case you want to do that. If you plug in any negative number, like let me go for a crazy huge negative number like -100, and you plug in -100 right here, you're going to end up with the square root of negative something, -95, and we know that that's imaginary. So we already know that that did not work. Any value on the left side of -5 is not going to work. Even -6 is not going to work, because -6, if I plug in -6, -6 plus 5 is -1. Square root of -1 is imaginary. I can no longer compare values right there. So that doesn't work. Any value on the inside will work. If I test like an easy number like 0, it should work. 0 plus 5 is 5. The square root of 5, it's going to be a little bit more than the square root of 4, which is 2. So maybe like 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, whatever. But if we go 2.3 plus 4, that's going to be 6.3 or 6.2. That's definitely less than or equal to 13. Any value that I plug in between -5 and 76 will work. Okay, so this was a yes in the middle. Any value out here will not work. If you plug in, like let's say 139, will that work? Yeah, if I plug in 139, that'll give me 144, which is square root of 144 is 12. 12 plus 4 is 16, and that's not less than 13, right? So any value out here will not work, no. So it's up to you if you like plugging in numbers or if you like to visually see the representation of your overlap. That will be the compound inequality to give you the answer. So here's the answer on the solutions, and that's exactly what we have. -5 is less than or equal to z, which is less than or equal to 76. All right, so once again, ladies and gentlemen, very important that we understand these steps right here. Step 1, set the radicand to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. That's one problem in itself. You're going to get an answer for that first step. Step 2, solve the entire inequality and get another answer. Okay. Step 3, place answers on a number line and test if you like plugging in numbers, right? If you don't like plugging in numbers, you could visually see where your overlap will be by graphing your inequality. The overlap piece will be your answer, okay? So right here we saw that the overlap is in between -5 and 76. That's why it's a compound inequality with both -5 on the left side, 76 on the right side, and the variable in between. But we also saw previously that sometimes it's only in one direction. The overlap piece is over here, not in between. So right here in this case, the answer would be x is greater than or equal to 16. So I hope we understand that. Should we do another? 27. All right, here are the steps. Step 1, set your radicand to be greater than or equal to 0 and solve. All right, so what is my radicand value right here? C plus 4. Right, C plus 4. Thank you, Melissa. So we have C plus 4. You know what? Let me do it. A little bit over here on the side. C plus 4. We're going to set that to be greater than or equal to 0. This is step 1. We're going to subtract 4. We're going to get an answer. C is greater than or equal to -4. So we're going to put that on a number line in a while. Again, this was step 1. Let's go to step 2. Step 2, let me read it for you right here. Solve the entire inequality and get another answer. All right, so let's solve the entire inequality. Here's the entire inequality. Let's solve it. You want to first isolate the square root. So we need to get rid of that 9 by subtracting 9. We do to one side, do to the other side. You will end up with negative square root of c plus 4 is greater than or equal to negative 3. And then I need to continue isolating the radical, right? You don't want a negative sign in front. So that's kind of like if you had a negative 1 in the front, so you divide by negative 1. Or think of it, you want it to be positive, all you have to do is multiply both sides of your inequality by a negative 1. So I'm going to just divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1, but remember this is an inequality. And this is our last step on isolating the radical. And whenever you're solving an inequality on your last step, if you happen to multiply or divide by a negative, you have to flip the inequality symbol. So this guy right here is going to have to be flipped because I divided by a negative 1. So what do I have now? I have the square root of c plus 4 is greater than or equal to positive 3. Continuing to solve, I am going to square both sides, giving me c plus 4 is greater than or equal to 9. Final step, subtract 4, subtract 4. You will get c is greater than or equal to 5. So I have my two answers here. C is greater than or equal to negative 4. And we also have c is greater than negative 5. So step 3 is to place answers on a number line and test or visually see the overlap. Okay, test values or visually see the overlap. So I'm going to take these two answers, put them on a number line. We have negative 4 over here. We have positive 5 over here. I'm going to go with the visual. At negative 4, this reads c is greater than or equal to negative 4. Solid dot at negative 4, greater than is to the right. Let's go for this other one over here. C is greater than or equal to 5. Solid dot at 5, greater than is to the right. So visually, I see that the overlap piece is not in between the two values, only on one side, and that would be over here. Look, if I keep going to the right, it's going to overlap right here where there's blue and red, obviously. So the overlap piece is at 5 to the right. So I already know that my answer is going to be x is greater than or equal to 5. Okay? If you're not a visual person, you could test values, right? If you test any number that's over here, and let's zoom out a bit so we could actually see the original again. If we test any number that's over here, like let's say negative 5. If I plug in a negative 5 right there, negative 5 plus 4 is negative 1. The square root of negative 1 is imaginary. Done. It doesn't work, right? No go over there. It didn't work. If I test a value like let's say 0, right, what's going to happen? Well, let's plug in 0 right there. 0 plus 4 is 4. The square root of 4 is 2. Negative in front, that's a negative 2. And yes, oh wait, I'm sorry. 9 minus 2. I totally forgot about that 9. 9 minus 2, that'll be 7. And 7 is not less than or equal to 6. 7 is greater than 6. So as you could see, by plugging in 0, it did not work either. So when does it work? When you plug in a value that's either 5 or greater. 5 will work, right? 5 plus 4 is 9. The square root of 9 is 3. 9 take away 3 is equal to 6. And we do have that or equal to sign. Or you could plug in any value that's greater than 5 and it will work. For example, if I plug in a 12 right there, 12 plus 4 is 16. The square root of 16 is 4. 9 take away 4 is less than 6. Okay? So any value over here, like 16, will work. That's a yes. So obviously, this is the only answer. It's not a compound inequality. It's simply x is greater than or equal to 5. So I hope this helps. Of course, if you understand it, that's great. But the only way to actually learn, the only way to get smart, the only way to get better at this is for you to practice. So you guys could show up every single day and watch me do this and understand it. That's great, but that's not going to give you the skills to pass the test, right? You guys need to practice on your own. That's why I give you your homework. That's why I give you solutions. That's why I give you videos explaining the solutions. Please take advantage of that.